She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For Catacrow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Catacrow, Dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Catacrow, Dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. All day a back now, me now a come home. Inaga, jackass, yeah, I forget she load.
Good night to all of you. President Granger, good night as well. This particular part of the song, when they're coming home from the back dam, those who don't have donkey carts or a donkey, you know what happened? The guys them with the donkey and the donkey cart will pass and say, "Hey, bye, I gonna reach home today. I gonna reach home today." Good night. How are you, sir?
Life in the country. I'm fine,
Life in
and
the
I'm
country.
looking forward to this important program as usual.
Yep. And again, I know you have enjoyed life in the country as well. Um, it's for me. I believe it's the best part of my life there because it taught me so much. I was telling just the other day there was a conversation and we were talking about life in the country back in the day, so to speak. And I said we had a little green radio. I know you would like the color green radio, and it was like a television for us. We had to watch the guys play cricket right on that same radio. We had to watch the news. We had to visualize everything. And as little boys and girls, I think it taught us how to use our imaginations, how to think. And so those, apart from playing cricket and running around throwing, I bet you don't know what is banga. Throw banga seed. I know some. Anyways, yeah, life in the country. Sorry that I get carried away every time I listen to this
Yeah,
song.
you'll be surprised to know that some things which may be common on the quarantine might be very strange when you get to Eskimo Coast. I mean,
Yeah,
if you go in the quarantine, you don't ask, to buy, things like, aubergine or boulanger. If you don't say baigan, people never know what you mean. But baigan is not typical throughout the country.
yeah.
People in Mabaruma or Karasabay may not know what baigan is.
Or
And
Saijan Baj,
yeah,
whatever.
a lot of vegetables have names which are typical of maybe some ethnic group or maybe some region of the country. Anyhow,
Absolutely. Good night to all of you. Some of you are in the country right now looking at us. Lots of you out there in the quarantine and other parts, West Coast, Berbice, Georgetown, wherever you are in Linden, and even outside of Guyana. Good night to all of you. Tonight's topic, we're dealing with Guyanese girls and the fact that Guyanese girls have the highest rate of adolescent pregnancy and early motherhood in the Commonwealth Caribbean. Over 3,000 Guyanese teenage girls become pregnant every year. I repeat, over 3,000 Guyanese teenage girls become pregnant every year. Teenage mothers, and this is between the ages of 15 to 19 years old, of every race, region, and religion, face many challenges to raise their children in healthy and happy homes in Guyana. This is exactly what we will be discussing tonight on Anansi Web Education. 1 in 10 new mothers is a teen. 1 in 10 new mothers, is a teen. Leads me to the first question as we deal with the program adolescent pregnancy and early motherhood. Uh, Question number one, President Granger. Why do so many adolescent girls become pregnant in Guyana today?
Well, I think every adolescent boy or girl knows the answer. You have to do something to become pregnant. And the simple answer to your question, not trying to be funny, is that they got engaged, they got involved in some sexual activity, and that's why they become pregnant. But beyond that question, as again I said, I'm not trying to be funny. Beyond that question, there are very serious reasons because many of the pregnancies might be unintended, and in that regard, you know, you may feel that once a girl engages in unprotected sex, the consequence is very likely to be pregnancy. And I think 8 out of 10 pregnancies, or even among adolescents, are likely to be unplanned. Maybe 1 or 2 of them intend to get pregnant, even though they're not married, and even though they're underage, but they intend to get pregnant. But the majority become pregnant when, especially schoolgirls between the second and fourth forms. So that is a time of your life when there's a lot of uh, experimentation, and there's a lot of excitement, boyfriend girlfriend story. But I would say that in concrete terms, one, there's a lot of ignorance about it, and some people engage in sex not knowing what the outcome would be. And many girls have not been educated about sexual and reproductive health. Some of those who are educated don't have access to birth control, and some may be involved in unstable economic. They might be working for their livelihood as a domestic, or as working in a market, or doing some job which exposes them to predatory behavior by males, even though they're underage. And many young girls, maybe not many, but some young girls have actually been induced or led into sexual relations by their relatives, their mothers, in order to earn money. And sometimes there have been cases in trafficking in persons in which young girls have been sent into the hinterland to work at some shady enterprise as waitresses, and they end up sleeping with the customers. So it could be because they're poor and they've been exploited. Then, of course, you have situations in which their peers, their other girls, their friends might have gotten a baby, and and maybe their peers laugh at them and say, "You're barren, you can't get a child." And maybe to keep up with their peers, they just get a child to show that they are fertile. It does happen. People just try not to be embarrassed and try to keep up with their peers. And there's a lot of pressure from the media, the easy access of pornography, and people seem to be having fun on the screen, and they want to have some fun too. And they get involved in sexual activities. Sometimes their mothers were themselves adolescent mothers. Adolescent mothers tend to be children of adolescent mothers, very high likelihood. And they just do like the mother, and the mother is very tolerant to that sort of behavior, very condescending, and they don't tell their daughters that once they get involved in unprotected sex, they're likely to get pregnant. And then some areas, some societies, some maybe villages, it is okay for girls to become pregnant and drop out of school, because there's so many people in the village who've done the same thing without any adverse consequences. And society doesn't condemn them. They go to church, they go to school, they go about their business. even though they have, one or two children and they're not married, even as teenagers. Unfortunately, also, there is in some communities a high level of substance abuse. People smoke ganja and maybe they drink alcohol excessively. And when they do that, they want to have some other form of excitement. And worst of all, there are cases of excuse me, there are cases of sexual abuse in which adolescent girls are exploited um, by predators. Older men in the family, maybe relatives, maybe visitors. They are punks on some adolescent girl, and in many cases, of course, if the child is below the age of consent, that could be considered a statutory rape. So these are 10 factors which I selected. There may be more, but uh, these are matters that could be dealt with by parents or by um, other authorities, school authorities. So it doesn't have to end up in pregnancy and, of course, childbirth, but it means that the girls must know what the likely consequences of unprotected sex would be. And I'm not saying it's up to them to make the choice. It's up to them to be given the type of knowledge, the type of instruction, type of information and education, which would help them to make the correct choice. And I wouldn't expect the correct choice would involve dropping out of school and exposing themselves to the labor market, which would normally demand some form of academic qualification, which they can only get in schools. So if they are forced to drop out of school, as adolescents, before finishing their grade six, or that's worse, and of course, the CXE or the CAPE, they should be given a full tour of secondary school education so that they can go up to the level of CAPE. And it is quite likely that educated girls who have finished the equivalent of CAPE or A levels or even graduated from university would probably decide not to get a child until they have some remunerative employment. They can look, they want to get a house, they want to get a car, they want to look after their children. But if they're forced to make those decisions, at age 14, when they should be, playing games or playing litty, you can see the consequences likely to be unfavorable. So the big answer to the question is that there are lots of problems that this young child is forced to make, and sometimes without adult guidance and supervision or advice. It is not a legal matter. I wouldn't even call it a moral matter. Sometimes it's a functional matter that your bodies are just not strong enough to bear children until they're maybe 20 or 21. By that time, they should be going to university or looking after other aspects of their future. But it's a serious matter.
Serious matter indeed. As we move on to the second question, what are the consequences of adolescent pregnancy and early motherhood?
Well, I touched on some of those areas already in answering your first question. And many of the consequences are unfavorable, medically, psychologically, socially. There are lots of serious consequences. Generally, our society is still likely to stigmatize a young mother, particularly an unmarried teenage mother, and most likely the child will be excluded from school. Our public education system cannot cope with pregnant third or fourth performers at this present time. There are measures to help to reintroduce a young mother, but the education will be interrupted anyway. The girl has to leave schooling to get a child, look after that child, maybe to be reintegrated. But other consequences are that if her education is interrupted, it would damage her prospects for the type of employment, maybe the type of livelihood that would be satisfying. And particularly if a girl doesn't stop drinking, if she is a drinking person, maybe she might take a few beers or something stronger with her friends. Maybe the friends would smoke ganja. I'm not saying it is desired, it is undesirable. Maybe taking drugs in some areas. And there's some parts of the country which are notorious for the production of ganja. And there have been cases in which some children have been expelled or suspended for smoking ganja. Um, and then, of course, you have the question of parental guidance. Many mothers who themselves became pregnant as teenagers might be very tolerant to their own daughters, becoming pregnant. And instead of giving the girls advice, after the event happens, they just provide, support. But obviously, well, as my mother used to tell me, the time to repent is before the event. That is when you're doing badly at the exams. And similarly, in a case in which teenage girls may become pregnant, the time to repent is before the event. So don't get yourself pregnant. Don't engage in activities which you could become pregnant. Even if your mom was herself a mother while she was a teenager, it doesn't mean that you have to do that as well. Um, and it's very likely that a girl who bears a child during her teenage years is going to have a very difficult time to reintegrate into the labor market. A child, bringing up a child is a heavy responsibility, not only financially, but in terms of time consuming, the time you have to spend. And when you look at what happens in the public education system, look who in the Parent Teachers Association, look who is picketing the schools if the teachers are not punctual or not looking after the children. It's the mothers. And the mothers look after the children, and you don't see the fathers going to these Parent Teachers Association. The mothers have to be there. The mothers are doing the shopping. The mothers are caring for their children. So once a teenager gets a child, she has to devote a substantial part of her time, not to her education or improving herself or preparing for her adulthood, but for looking after the children. It is a burden that adolescents should not have to bear, and that is why, in most cases, postponing, pregnancy or postponing actual, motherhood until the child is mature enough, maybe in her 20s, when she's graduated from university or secondary school, or matriculated from secondary school. But I think those are some of the consequences that we need to bear in mind. The best, well, it's not for me to say what's the best for other persons, but a prudent choice would be to wait until that adolescent becomes an adult and could make a different type of decision. And say, well, I'm now ready to have a child and to live with the consequences. But a 13, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old girl is not ready to make that sort of decision, in my view. And especially when you find the employment rate for adolescent mothers is very high. Unemployment rate is very high. Okay.
If you're now, thank you so much, President Granger. If you're now joining us today, we're dealing with adolescent pregnancy and early motherhood. Early motherhood. Our third question: where in Guyana? This is important. Where in Guyana are adolescent pregnancies most likely to occur?
There is statistical evidence that will answer your question. And the facts are, again, I'm not trying to, criticize any part of the country or any community, because this can affect people of any race, region, or religion. It's not a religious question. It's not a race question. Um, but there is regional evidence to show that the Barima Waini region, Region 1, the Kuyuni Mazuni region, Region 7, the Pomeroon, the Pataro Separuni region, Region 8, the Rupununi region, Region 9, and the Upper Demerara Berbice region, Region 10. Those 5 regions have the highest rate of adolescent pregnancy and early motherhood. That is a statistical fact. Why? Well, as I said, it's not a racial question, a religious question. Um, but the fact is that some of those communities are scattered, and you don't have the same access to education, you don't have the same access to governmental services, to even public health services. So there are certain factors. I'm not going to explain all those factors, but you asked me a question. That type of uh, the answer is that hinterland, those 5 hinterland regions have the highest rate of, of, um, of teenage pregnancies, adolescent pregnancies, and early motherhood. Region 1, 7, 8, 9, 10. And those are the areas. And it means that interventions must be targeted to those areas as well. Because something happens there, something is in the water. But the fact is that they are not the recipients or the beneficiaries of the type of counseling, the type of education, the type of public health interventions, which could help children, and I call them children because they are children, through these difficult years. They're very tempting periods, in the child's age between 15 and 19, and they need help. They shouldn't be left alone without the advice and guidance of adults.
That is so true. Kids should not be left alone without the guidance of adults. You've got to ensure that you pay key attention to your children, whether girls or boys. You've just got to be their parents. All right. So the fourth question: who suffers most from unplanned adolescent pregnancy?
This is a very wide question. Um, well, certainly at the center of it all is the young mother, that adolescent mother whose body is most likely not physically capable of bearing a child. And even with good nutrition, girls should not risk. Again, I'm not a doctor, an obstetrician, but I think that maybe the age of 20 or 21, should be the earliest people should consider pregnancy. But that's my view. But I would think that a young woman who is only, and I have seen girls, 12, 13, 14 years, who have born children, and really, the child is the second victim. The mother will suffer, and the public health system has taken to bringing mothers from hinterland and other remote areas to central areas, where the children could get the best medical care, especially in the days closest to delivery. The child too is probably going to be underweight, and if the mother is anemic, well, the child would probably receive special attention. Um, so, from a biological or a physical point of view, maybe even psychological point of view, the mother and child are the first victims. Then you have to think what's happening to the family. Many of the adolescent parents come from families which are poor. It means there's another burden on the family, on the mother or father or the family, to feed a new mouth. Especially in days we're talking about high cost of living. A baby is expensive. It's an expensive creature to raise, and the child needs special clothing, special medication, special food, and a lot of attention, day and night. And when a child doesn't get what it wants, the child would yell. And sometimes mothers are very impatient. Fathers are very impatient. Other fathers have much work to do because fathers try to avoid that burden. But a mother must be prepared to get up several times during the night to look after the baby and to stay at home with the baby. A young child is completely helpless, completely dependent on adults for care and attention. The child cannot help herself or himself, for several months. And the family would have an extra burden to bear, if you want to call it suffer, but the family would obviously suffer. And sometimes there are other psychological factors, that the grandparents and other persons, might be embarrassed, psychologically embarrassed, and maybe the family might be planning to do something, maybe get involved in some enterprise, invest in a business, and then they have to divert their funds to look after this unplanned pregnancy. And as a result, they stay poor. So there are lots of issues that could help to drag a family down. So it's not just the mother and the child that she's bearing, but it could also be the parents, it could also be the whole family, which will have to bear the burden of this extra child. And then, of course, the father of the child, and of course, every adolescent pregnancy has a father, and the father is very likely to absent himself. Once he has made the girl pregnant, he would probably go somewhere else, and maybe he works in the mines or in the timber grants, or he works in another country, or he was planning to migrate, do something which doesn't involve, performing his functions as a father to that young child or to the mother of the child. So there could be lots of problems if the pregnancy is unplanned. And the family as a whole, particularly the father of the child, notoriously might not be prepared to take the burden bear the burden of bringing a child into this world. So many people can suffer, and unfortunately, most of the suffering has to be borne by the mother and the child and the immediate family. And again, it is either mother, grandmother, or sometimes great grandmother who would bear the brunt of that burden.
Exactly. As we close off tonight's program with our final question to President Granger, how can the high rate of adolescent pregnancies be reduced? And just before President Granger, I just wish that there were programs across the country, as we saw what happened under your presidency, that there were interest in this particular area in having teenage pregnancies reduced. And let me take this time to say thank you for what you guys did under your presidency. And, as we were preparing to discuss this topic tonight, I was looking around at some articles to see what this current administration is doing in this area. And there's absolutely nothing that I found. Absolutely nothing. Final question. How can the high rate of adolescent pregnancies be reduced?
Well, there are several means, there are several interventions. And I would like to say that in every country, you have an issue of adolescent pregnancies. It is not unique to Ghana. What is unique in Ghana is the high rate that we are leading other English-speaking countries in the Caribbean in the rate of adolescent pregnancies. I said sometimes it's 9 or 10 per day. And by this time, tomorrow night, 10 girls will have given birth. It is an incredible rate, and I would say that I know of no government, I know of no institution which is not concerned about the high rate of adolescent pregnancies, and uh, would not want to implement measures to reduce the rate of pregnancy. Not just something like bad weather or climate change. This has serious economic and social consequences. I would say that we can look at this at various levels. At one level, I would say at the level of the country as a whole, um, we have had the benefit of international assistance. And I would say that the Pan American Health Organization, World Health Organization, and the United Nations Population Fund, what is called UNFPA, and also the UNICEF, they have been involved and they have made material contributions and also research. They provided studies and they provided good advice. And many NGOs have cooperated with PAHO, WHO, UNICEF, and UNFPA. And my wife is the head of an organization. She founded what is called the Naira Foundation. And she worked very closely with UNICEF and UNFPA during the the United, the APNU AFC tour of duty in this country. So that is one. At the second level, of course, there are national organizations, and again, my wife founded the Anara Foundation. She worked with the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association. Then you had the Guyana Women Minors Organization, and they have been very influential to women across differences. Also, the WAD, YWCA was involved. So there are other, I think Red Thread might have been involved in different ways. So there are non-governmental organizations which are concerned, which have been involved. So that is one level. But at the lower level too, you've had to have interventions by individuals to ensure that the, the type of education that is given to young girls or adolescents about sexual and reproductive health, and mothers, of course, are very influential, but the influence of peers, the influence of the girls' friends in school, the influence of the media, and quite correctly, some of the media produce programs, and some of the media produce programs which are purely pornographic. They deal with the fun side of sex, but they don't deal with the outcomes of unprotected sex. So everybody wants to have fun, but when young girls get engaged in fun, and they have there's the element of promiscuity, they have multiple partners, then it becomes a very serious social problem. So I would say that the consequences could be very, very burdensome, and working to reduce the incidence means one, education is very important. That it is something that should not be ignored. There needs to be education, even at the level of the home. There needs to be some means of overcoming the ignorance. So at least the young girls know what the consequences of sexual activity are likely to be. They need to be educated, definitely. And we mustn't regard sex as something immoral. Sex, sex has to happen. That's how we're here, because of sexual activity or appearance. So it is something that needs to be the subject of education. There needs to be access to birth control. And again, unfortunately, some religions have taken strong positions on birth control. And that is an issue that, if young girls are going to be involved in sexual activity, there must be some way of protecting them from disease and, of course, from pregnancy. There needs also to be some consideration of the fact that uh, overwhelmingly um, adolescent mothers are from the poor sections of society. So it is sometimes related to inequality. And if girls are involved in unequal relationship with men in the workplace or school, sometimes teachers are predators, or sometimes they are unemployed boys, who, or maybe they be employed in ways, in criminal ways. They can have money to throw around. Sometimes, accusations be made against minibus drivers who offer free trips to schoolgirls, and of course they end up exploiting those girls, and sometimes those could be cases of rape. And even some of our best secondary schools, which are co-educational, have had cases in which male teachers have been involved in predatory relations with young girls. So all of these things need to be considered when we're thinking of reducing the possibility of teen pregnancy. And I would say that it is a question that has to be handled at the level of the state, at the level of international organization, at the level of non-governmental organization, and at the level of the community and the family. And if these services are not available, that's why it is a problem having a high rate of adolescent pregnancy in the hinterland. Because if the services are not available because of distance or because of the fact that there's no public education service in those villages in the hinterland, and I said five. The Guyana has 10 regions. 5 of the regions are seriously affected by adolescent pregnancy. So if half of those regions, half of Guyana's administrative regions are affected by this problem, it means that it has to be tackled at the national level. And you can only reduce it if there is a combination of effort on the part of mothers and families, on the part of the institutions like education, on the part of non-governmental organizations, and on the part of international organizations, which have been very helpful, PAHO, WO, UNFPA, and UNICEF. So it is a holistic approach that will bring about a reduction in teen pregnancies. And there has to be a culture in the country, and that culture has to be reflected at the highest level of the government, in which there is low tolerance for sexual predators. And our own government, within recent memory, has been accused of being tolerant to persons in high places who have been involved or who have been accused of being involved in predatory sexual activities. And unless there is a cultural statement or cultural position at all levels, not just the church, not just the family, but throughout the country, um, that there is no tolerance for the type of sexual activity which makes young women or young girls pregnant and leads to early motherhood. You're not going to bring about the change. There really needs to be a sea change in the cultural attitude, not just in the churches. The churches are driven by books which are very ancient, but we need to understand there's a modern problem. There's a problem in Guyana today, and we need to ensure that these measures are implemented to reduce the possibility of teen pregnancy. It is a problem in Guyana, and it is a problem that has to be brought under control. And the high level of teen pregnancies is not something Guyana should boast about. It is keeping our young girls back, and it's harming the next generation. It is keeping them anchored in poverty, and it is depriving them of the possibilities of having a full and happy life. It is a very serious problem, and I think it's a problem that could be solved, it could be reduced. And the whole question of what I call children getting children is not a sound basis for developing this country. Children need to be in school or at sport, and enjoying their childhood, and not staying at home, minding babies and wondering, where the next meal will come from. We need to build respectful relations between young men and young women, and we need to ensure that the families play a role in making the entire community more stable. And so all of us, all of the young women and their children could grow up in a country where everybody could enjoy a good life. And right now, it's not happening. When you have 10 women every day becoming pregnant, and as teenagers, there are bound to be problems down the street, and they're bound to be down the road, and they're bound to be problems which affect our next generation. People are entitled to a good life, and I think the high rate of adolescent pregnancies is preventing our young women from having that good life, and of course, preventing their children from enjoying that full life.
Thank you so much, President Granger. Answering that final question, how can the high rate of adolescent pregnancies be reduced? Thank you guys so much. Tonight's topic, adolescent pregnancy and early motherhood. And of course, this program here, it's with the aim of ensuring that everyone could enjoy a good life. That's why we're talking about this. Our little girls should be allowed to be little girls. There should be laws to ensure that little girls and little boys are protected. And so while we as adults have our part to play, our role to play, even within the village, the politicians have their roles to play as well. They shouldn't be predators, sexual predators. They are just waiting to move in on little girls or little boys. And then again, the law. The law should be there to protect these little boys and girls. The police, men and women, should be allowed to do their jobs. And even the NGOs that have been very active, for the most part, I have seen that on the coalition government, your presidency, it seems to be lacking today. But you never know. President Granger, thank you so much for your time. Thanks to all of our listeners, wherever you are in Guyana, outside of Guyana. And we hope that you will have been informed on today's topic, dealing with adolescent pregnancy and early motherhood. President Granger, again, thank you so much for being here tonight with us. And thank you for, as president of the country, what you did under your government to protect adolescent or to have adolescent pregnancy and early motherhood a priority under your administration, and to protect our little boys and girls. We need that. We're just not seeing that anymore. But thank you so much for what you did during your presidency, sir.
Thank you for having me on the program, and good night to your viewers and listeners.
Thank you so much as well. And to all of our listeners, thanks again. God bless you. See you next week. Same place, same time. Ta-ta.